The same question has been posed by Cake Boss fans for years. What caused Buddy Valastro to actually leave the show that made him famous? Everyone was left wondering when he abruptly stepped aside after establishing a baking empire, appearing in more than 100 episodes, and becoming the face of Carlos Bakery. The truth remained hidden until now, despite intermittent whispers. What took place in the background? What was different? And why did the complete story not come out for 5 years? Let's investigate. Fame throughout the country from modest Hoboken. Hoboken, New Jersey is where the narrative starts. Carlos Bakery was a community store, with strong family ties long before TV cameras ever set foot inside. Established in 1910, it gained local recognition for its traditional Italian cakes, lobster tails, and cannoli. However, nothing changed until Barlow Buddy Valastro Jr. took charge. When Buddy's father died, he took over at the age of 17. That was in 1994. Being a teenager and managing a whole bakery enterprise was a lot to bear. Buddy didn't hesitate, though. He was already familiar with the trade. He had spent his childhood in that kitchen, learning how to pipe by hand, cleaning mixers, and assisting with trays. By the time most children his age were leaving for college, Buddy was running his family business, managing employees and making wedding cakes. At the time, there was just one bakery, which was situated at 95 Washington Street. It had a devoted clientele from the neighborhood, cramped quarters, and outdated ovens. Buddy, however, had more ambitious intentions. Selling pastries to the local population wasn't his only goal. His goal was to establish Carlos Bakery as a household name. When Buddy started competing in cake contests in the early 2000s, that ambition began to take shape. He gained recognition for both his talent and charisma in the Food Network Challenge, where he won one of his first victories. He used edible materials to create intricate desserts with towering structures, moving arms, and spinning pieces. Producers took note. His concept for a brand new reality show was acquired by TLC in 2009. Every week, it would follow Buddy and his family as they managed the bakery, took orders from customers, and created outrageous cake designs. Cake Boss was the name of the show. Cake Boss had a distinct vibe from the first season. It was more than just baking. It involved high-stakes deliveries, tense deadlines, and family disputes. Viewers witnessed Buddy, laboring alongside his sisters, brother-in-law, and a large team of bakers and decorators. The kitchen was constantly moving, noisy, and occasionally chaotic. The main focus of the show was Buddy's unwavering determination to create flawless cakes. It was an immediate success. Beginning in 2009, Cake Boss ran for 10 seasons. Over 2 million people watched each episode of the show at its height. In addition to watching cakes shaped like fire trucks or roulette tables, viewers were captivated by Buddy's fierce perseverance in overcoming each obstacle. He never cut corners. He held his employees to a high standard at all times. The popularity of the show led to Carlos Bakery's expansion. After establishing new stores in New Jersey, Buddy expanded to New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Florida, and even Las Vegas. What started off as a single Hoboken business evolved into a nationwide chain. He also introduced products, baking supplies, and cookbooks. Then came global reach. Outside the original bakery, tourists from all around the world waited in line to purchase cupcakes and snap pictures. Buddy was more than just a baker by the middle of the decade. He was a well-known individual. He produced a number of spin-off series, operated various businesses, and appeared on discussion shows. But he kept returning to the principles his father instilled in him throughout it all. Maintain the family business, put in a lot of effort, and never compromise on quality. Buddy Rose went from being a young bakery owner in a small New Jersey town to becoming the face of one of the nation's most popular food shows. Like his cakes, he constructed it layer by layer. However, beneath the celebrity and public persona, things were changing. And those adjustments, some obvious, some not, would ultimately result in a choice that nobody anticipated. Misfortunes that change your life. The pivotal moment occurred in 2017 when Buddy Valastro's mother, Mary Valastro, died following a protracted fight with ALS. Fans had already witnessed hints of her health decline by the time the show's later seasons aired. As her illness had been getting worse for years, Buddy was candid about the impact her illness had on the bakery and his personal life. Mary was more than just a mother. She served as the business's and the family's glue. Nothing could fill the void she left behind. Mary had been a Cake Boss regular. Her ideas, opinions, and old-fashioned discipline helped counterbalance Buddy's frantic energy. Buddy didn't instantly halt production or take a back seat once she passed away. He persevered as always. But according to those close to him, something changed. He began to consider what was truly important after losing her. It took 3 years for it to really sink in. A second blow came in 2020. It wasn't sentimental this time. It was tangible. Buddy had a strange accident at his home bowling alley on a calm Sunday that nearly put an end to his baking career. A metal rod repeatedly stabbed his right hand when he was attempting to rectify a pin-setter failure. It was said that the wound was gory. His teenage sons had to use a saw to release his jammed and seriously bleeding hand. After being taken to the hospital, he had emergency surgery. At first, the prognosis was unclear. It was uncertain to the doctors how much motion he would regain, whether he would ever be able to pipe frosting, roll fondant, or even hold a spatula in the same manner. The thought of losing hand function wasn't just frightening for someone who made a living and a career out of precise cake decorating. It was devastating. Buddy underwent numerous operations and a lot of physical therapy over the course of the following few months. Constantly upbeat, he gave interviews and shared updates on the internet. In private, however, things were different. Insiders say he struggled with discomfort, frustration, and the worry that his time in the kitchen might be permanently ending. Since the recuperation was gradual, every little step forward felt like a huge victory. Buttoning a shirt or holding a cup of coffee become objectives. Those who followed him during this period saw a significant shift. He wasn't performing demos in public. He was not displaying ornate cakes. It was the first time Buddy wasn't on camera, creating stuff since Cake Boss started. Others took over instead. His kids, Buddy Jr. in particular, began to show up more frequently, and the family's focus somewhat changed. It wasn't only a bodily injury. Buddy was compelled to pause and take a real rest as a result. He had never done that before. Not since, as a teenager taking over the bakery, he had been constantly on the go for almost 30 years. Constantly growing, constantly recording, constantly seeking the next challenge. Everything stopped because of this accident. For Buddy, losing the ability to use his hands meant losing a piece of who he was. In an interview, he once claimed that baking was not only what he did, but also who he was. And now that aspect of him had been permanently suspended. This recuperation and introspection phase lasted well into the following year. Even after his strength recovered, the circumstance made him reevaluate his role in his life and in the bakery. He began to view his family, his business, and his own health from a new perspective. Additionally, Buddy was going through a process that would soon result in a much more significant decision. While fans awaited updates and new episodes, change in the direction of the show. Cake Boss began as a show about cakes, family, and mayhem in a bakery in Hoboken. The format operated for more than 10 years. The fans were prepared: large people, enormous cakes, and endless vitality. However, certain alterations became apparent during the latter seasons. Buddy Valastro's new endeavors and the cast members' rotation weren't the only changes. Longtime viewers noted that the show's structure started to change. The formula for the first seasons was obvious. A patron would enter with a ridiculous request. The episode would progress toward a significant delivery or event, as Buddy took up the challenge. Not all of these cakes were desserts. They resembled buildings, stadiums, animals, or even moving machinery, and they were 5 feet tall. Seeing if the team could do it on schedule and without incident was what created the interest. However, as time passed, that tension subsided. The cake's ambition persisted, but the element of surprise faded. It was more difficult to surpass what had previously been done after 10 years of TV exposure. The editing style had evolved by the time the show returned for fresh seasons in the late 2010s and early 2020s. There was a change in the energy. Viewers began to witness longer parts regarding corporate operations, staff interviews, and more behind-the-scenes content. Production-related sources report that the change was not a coincidence. Buddy himself said it. He desired to change the course of the show. Building a legacy is more important than cake tricks. The Valastro brand and the growth of the baking industry were the subjects of additional discussion in the subsequent episodes. Although cake decorating was still there, it was no longer the main attraction. The location was another significant alteration. Almost everything took place in the Hoboken bakery in the early years. However, by seasons 9 and 10, further filming was done at the bakery's New Jersey City headquarters. Approximately 30,000 square feet, this more recent building was more than just a kitchen. It was a fully functional commercial production facility with automated equipment, walk-in freezers, and a sleek, contemporary design. Although useful, it lacked the old location's charm and intimacy. That change was deliberate. One shop's struggles to meet deadlines were no longer the focus of the broadcast. It was now a record of an expanding empire. The show started emphasizing corporate transactions, brand collaborations, and product launches more than cake decorating. In 2009, fans fell in love with a different cake boss. It was changing into something else, whether or not the audience liked it. Buddy was working on other shows at the same time. He hosted cooking game programs, participated in baking contests, and collaborated with many networks. He began to deviate more from the original format as a result of these side endeavors. Longtime viewers had differing opinions on the introduction of new family members and employees in some episodes, who weren't on the initial cast. There were other issues behind the scenes. It was more difficult to keep up the same pace due to tight filming dates, growing production costs, and shifting viewer preferences. While not drastically, there was a noticeable drop in viewership. TV viewing habits were altered by streaming services, and Cake Boss wasn't a binge-style program. That model was losing ground, and it was made for weekly airings. Buddy remained devoted to the brand in spite of everything. He didn't leave or openly protest the modifications. He leaned into the evolution instead. He changed the marketing strategy to focus on national product distribution, renamed some aspects of the company, and began exploring alternative formats for telling his narrative. As a result of the change, Cake Dynasty, a brand new program, had its network premiere. It showed Buddy, who is now a parent, helping his children navigate the difficulties of managing a business. Cakes weren't the only thing on the agenda. It was about making decisions, exercising leadership, and getting the next generation ready to take over. With this change, the Cake Boss structure was obviously broken. Some devoted fans were unhappy, but others thought it was a logical step forward. The man who took over his father's bakery at the age of 17 was no longer Buddy after nearly 10 years. The show needed to modify to reflect his new responsibilities. At the time, no one outside of his inner circle realized that this was more than just a change in style. It has nothing to do with network choices or ratings. The complete truth would only be revealed later, and the departure from Cake Boss was quite personal. The time. The question lingered in the air for a long time. And 5 years later, Buddy Valastro finally explains his departure from Cake Boss. It's simply devastating. Supporters conjectured. Threads around the internet attempted to piece it together. Theories were even put forth by food media outlets. Burnout was blamed by some. Others felt that network switching was the key. However, Buddy has yet to provide a direct response, despite numerous interviews and social media posts. And according to reports, he used these 6 words to begin the story. It's time to be honest. What then took place? As it happens, the choice to leave the show had nothing to do with television ratings, contracts, or even money. It boiled down to something far more unpleasant and personal, according to those close to him. He believed he had everything left to defend and nothing left to prove. The question caught him off guard during a sit-down interview for a different project. It just wasn't who I was anymore. The show, the pace, the cameras. It stopped feeling like me. I needed to be present for my family. I needed to be home. For those who had followed Buddy's journey from the beginning, his statement that he had decided to leave the show permanently struck a deep chord. Buddy had reached his breaking point after over 10 years of pushing himself on film, creating cakes, overseeing employees, and balancing a national brand. He acknowledged that he didn't want to be the character that fans saw in the later seasons. He was emotionally and physically worn out. It has nothing to do with the bakery. Carlos continued to run. Cakes continued to be prepared. However, the man who had previously flourished under strain had begun to crumble. According to people close to the production, Buddy was exhibiting symptoms of extreme exhaustion during the last 2 seasons. The days of filming grew shorter. He looked emotionally checked out at certain points, which had to be edited out of post-production cuts. According to insiders, it was something more serious than laziness. Buddy himself said that time was the most important component. He came to the realization that he had lost out on important times with his wife and children after years of working nonstop. He could hardly recall half of his oldest daughter's high school years, and she had begun applying to colleges. He wasn't present for his son's daily activities, such as games, dinners, or even just lounging around watching TV, because they were growing up quickly. No TV deadline ever struck as hard as that knowledge. Furthermore, although the hand injury had provided perspective, the subsequent events were what really compelled a choice. Buddy claimed that he began to feel as though the show was dragging him away from the life he was attempting to create. His actual world was passing him by a few blocks away, and he didn't want to spend his days in a studio version of a bakery. Therefore, it was he, not the network or a manager, who made the decision to either renew the show or go on. He informed the crew that he had finished filming. He had to get a life. There was only quiet, no dramatic ending, no farewell show, no farewell cake. The silence that signified the end of anything. The news was heartbreaking for his followers, who had been following his hustle since 2009. At last, the man who had infused each episode with vitality, passion, and mayhem was revealing what no one wanted to hear. The price was too expensive, so he left. Time, presence, and peace, not ratings or money. And there was no turning back once he had spoken it aloud. You see, Buddy Valastro didn't entirely leave the spotlight after deciding to leave Cake Boss behind. He simply moved to where the spotlight was. At first, a lot of people didn't realize that his exit from the show wasn't a retirement. A redirection took place. The most obvious indication of that was the speed at which he started to reintegrate into his life with his kids. Sophia, Buddy Jr., Marco, and Carlo are Buddy's 4 children. They had been on the sidelines of the show for years, only coming in for a family get-together or birthday cake. However, they had been quietly learning the ins and outs of the industry behind the scenes. As they grew older, they took on greater responsibility for day-to-day tasks, including baking, taking orders from customers, and comprehending the organizational framework of the company. Buddy was teaching them more than just cake decorating techniques. He was teaching them how to take charge. It took time for this to change. Employees who have been with Carlos Bakery for years said Buddy had been preparing for this gradual change for a while. After losing his mother, suffering a severe hand injury, and spending more than 10 years in front of the camera, he came to the realization that passing down the business was no longer merely a long-term idea. It had to take precedence in the near future. Buddy started delegating decision-making authority to his children on an internal level. His eldest child, Sophia, began to grasp the practical aspects of managing the bakery and assumed greater managerial responsibilities. The oldest son, Buddy Jr., was shown a keen interest in event planning and cake creation. Although they were still learning, Marco and Carlo, the youngest, were also filling in when necessary. The concept seemed obvious. Buddy wished for the brand to remain family-run, both in terms of name and operation. New programming that emphasized the family as a unit rather than Buddy as the leader resulted from this strategy. His kids played bigger parts in one of the performances he helped create, with Buddy serving more as a guide than the star. The episodes were organized according to business choices, obstacles, and innovative planning, all that he used to handle by himself. According to insiders, the mood changed as the movie was being filmed. This new chapter felt more collaborative than the pressure-filled atmosphere that characterized previous Cake Boss seasons. Buddy wasn't fighting over fondant details or shouting to achieve deadlines. He was giving directions. He was taking a step back. And that was a significant change for someone who had always been in the spotlight. He also rearranged his priorities in business. Buddy began concentrating on upholding quality and legacy, rather than attempting to expand his business or acquire another major TV agreement. He reduced some merchandising efforts, reorganized the operations of some of the bakery's outlying locations, and stepped up efforts to ensure his family had the resources necessary to sustain the business for the next 20 or 30 years. Those close to one of the main drivers of these adjustments was family, and it was straightforward. Control over time, not over other people. Buddy has been responding to deadlines, schedules, and network demands for the majority of his adult life. He wanted to be in charge of his hours now. He desired to travel without having to go through a production crew. He didn't want to work around a shoot in order to attend his children's school functions, but he also started to choose the media he interacted with more carefully. He began doing sporadic interviews that complemented his company objectives and personal ideals in place of extensive press tours. He focused on more manageable tasks that allowed him to continue doing what he liked without having to deal with an overburdening schedule and to remain near his house. Sustainability was the overarching concept that underpinned all of this, in family as well as in business. Buddy was aware that notoriety fades, trends shift, audiences shift, and shows are canceled. It wasn't just a popular program or a chain of bakeries that he wanted to abandon. His goal was to leave a functional model that his children could inherit, manage effectively, and still have space to live. He didn't want them to experience what he did, which was to give up personal time in order to maintain a public image. Rather, he hoped they would take what they could from his journey, learn from it, and create something that would endure without exhausting its creators. Ultimately, Buddy wasn't moving away to vanish. He was taking a step back to create something more robust, and he wasn't working alone this time. What follows? The response wasn't silent when Buddy Valastro gave his justifications for leaving. Industry insiders, employees, and fans all had something to say. The show continued for more than 10 years. It was now ingrained in American cuisine. Therefore, Buddy wasn't the only one affected when he left. People immediately noticed the void it left. The modifications were seen right away inside Carlos' bakery. Cakes, pastries, and bespoke orders were still being produced by the bakery, but in-store quality was given greater importance, and there were less camera crews, PR campaigns, and media attention. Team members reported a change in enthusiasm. The employees could concentrate more on internal training and customer service if the cameras weren't always on. A more stable, efficient operation was what was left after the stress of filming timetables was removed. There was a mixed reaction from the supporters. Some people grasped it immediately. Comments praising Buddy's choice and expressing gratitude for the years of entertainment were all over social media. Others were saddened by the termination of something that had grown ingrained in their daily lives. Fans who stood in line for hours outside the Hoboken location, parents who watched with their children, and teenagers who were inspired by cake design as children. The show's demise was devastating because it had built a devoted following. Buddy, however, wasn't finished with TV. He switched to different kinds of programming rather than taking a break. When his Showcake dynasty began, it followed a distinct structure. This time it concentrated on managing a company with multiple generations. It showed his wife, Lisa, and their children, assuming more significant roles in the future of the bakery. The tone had changed, but the drama remained. Buddy also participated in the food and travel show Legends of the Fork when he visited eateries around the nation. It was unrelated to cakes. This was about eating food, hearing other people's experiences, and understanding how local cooks created their own traditions. It revealed another side of Buddy, inquisitive, considerate, and perceptive. He was not the boss issuing directives. He was the one who inquired. Additionally, he leaned into new collaborations with companies that sold baking supplies, pet treats, and even sugar substitutes. The goal of all of this was to preserve Carlos' reputation in common families, without going overboard. This stage of his career is the most balanced he has ever been, according to insiders. Even now, he gets up early. Even though he still checks orders, he now takes more time off, goes to more events, and spends more time with his children. Race has been replaced by intention. Buddy isn't attempting to start a new franchise or beat the ratings. Longevity is his top priority, both personally and professionally. The legacy of Cake Boss has endured despite its discontinuation. People still travel to Hoboken solely to visit the original bakery, while new fans continue to discover previous episodes on streaming services. The name endures because of what it stands for: family, hustle, and heart, rather than because of a network schedule. Furthermore, Buddy is not after another limelight as he looks to the future. He's creating something more subdued but equally significant, something that endures.